So officially, welcome to day 2 and welcome to panel 5, Econarratives and Connections with the More Than Human. Our first speaker is Jessie Hill, who is a transdisciplinary eco-poet exploring creative catharsis and environmental connection. They are creating a film poem and essay series representing the ancient wheel of the year, researching how we can utilize creative expression in order to attune to the natural cycles and rhythms of our interdependent ecology for personal and collective well-being. And the title of the paper is Queering Ecological Narratives Through Trans-Corporeal Research Practice. Jessie, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. Yes, thank you for the introduction, Bianca. So I'm currently working, I'm about halfway through my PhD at the minute, whilst lecturing here at the Creative Writing Department. And yes, is this for the slides? Ooh, thank you. So today's short talk is going to be bookended by a couple of poems from the project that I'm working on. And it will include a brief summary of queer theory and transcorporeality in relation to research practice. You know, as you know, the people who are presenting today and otherwise, like this 15 minutes goes so quick. So I'm literally just kind of scratching the surface, and rather than going into any specifics of my recent project, it's more just a collation of some thoughts regarding general methodological approaches. But yeah, just before we begin, have you guys come across the studies? I think I first read about them in Kay Tempest's book on connections. Great book. And it's about how, like, they've done different studies, various studies into how when people are sharing a collective experience, such as a theatre performance or a musical concert, it's even the same for like a child with sharing a storybook with their parents or guardians, but their heartbeats and breath rates synchronize, and I just find this quite touching, to be honest. So it's becoming a little bit of a habit when I present that I just wanted to kind of playfully invite us all to share a few conscious breaths together in like acknowledgement of this. Of this kind of shared experience. If you don't mind entertaining me with that, then we can go for just a few breaths together. It's my breaths. All right. Okay, we're locked in. All right. Connected. Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for entertaining me. Okay, all right. So I'm just going to warm us up with a poetry reading. This was made from notes from a eco-poetics conference that I attended and presented at last year, where I just chose like 1 to 3 words from each presentation that I heard, and then I kind of threaded them together. I'm doing the same for this conference as well, so thank you for being a part of another little collaborative company. But yeah, it begins with a quote from Margaret Atwood. So this is liminal notes. It's not climate change, it's everything change. Retelling the story, the fluidity of language over time. Liminal bridges, queer as a verb, from below the neck, if you will, beckon, ochre, cairns, sap and taproots. From ground thread to the pulsing underflow. Sensing the landscape, polytemporal, pleasure, allowing, participatory, soil health and shadow work. The tipping points with ungolden shovels, micro-utopias, vibrant matter, delineation of the strata, thinking through relation, steady in stone. Okay, so that's liminal notes, and there's a nice kind of bridge there as we move on to briefly outlining queer theory. The line that talks about queer as a verb, because generally queer theory does see queerness as a verb in it's something that we do rather than it's something that we are or are not. Which does link to that Maria's talk there, and when we're talking about Indigenous languages, they are often more verb-based than noun-based, unlike English. But when I was I had a bit of a tangle trying to define queer theory in just a couple of slides, because as Nikki Sullivan says here, it's a discipline that refuses to be disciplined. I feel like queer theory by nature is quite anarchic. It's like resists definition and is impossible to capture. That's what makes it so beautiful. And it's why Meg John Barker says that queer theory, like the word queer, is a much contested term. It's always in flux. It can be used different ways by different academics and activists and creators. And this multiplicity and contradiction can be seen as a positive thing in the way, like by queer theorists who don't necessarily believe in universal truths or simplistic explanations. But yeah, Meg John Barker goes on to kind of try and summarize them, and I've tweaked this slightly to make it less anthropocentric. But some unifying features of queer theories could be the resisting of categorization, challenging the idea of essential identities, questioning binaries, demonstrating how things are contextual based on geography, history, culture, etc., and examining the power relations underlying certain understandings and categories and identities. And Meg John Barker goes on to say that we queer things when we resist. And this can be applied to research practice and research methodology. We can resist restrictive ideas and regimes of normativity in relation to research practice and creative expression, especially in the institutions of academia, but also outside of. And I just wanted to have a very quick brief note on queer ecology, because it might be beneficial to some of your avenues of research. This is like a reasonably contemporary application of queer theory to the discipline of ecology, attempting to shift paradigms away from binary, rigid, heteronormative ways of understanding nature towards a more interdependent and fluid understanding. But there's a lot of, again, it feels like I'm just kind of hopping and jumping from different things. But if you wanted to, if this is something that could be an interesting avenue, let's talk about it. And I've got some fantastic resources there and discussions to be had. Okay, so just moving on to trans-corporeality then. This is like a post-humanist mode of new materialism coined by Professor of English and environmental researcher Stacey Alamo. And just as a little refresher, so post-humanism is referring to like the decentering of humans as like above other life forms, and new materialism is referring to like an interdisciplinary approach to theory and research, which aims to explore the power of matter. And so, yeah, it was like a light bulb moment when someone put me onto trans-corporeality, because it's very clear in the way that it pertains to, again, this word fluid coming in here, but pertains to fluidity between material and theoretical bodies, and again is challenging dualities and dichotomies. Trans-corporeality assumes inter and interconnections, interactions, entanglements, and transits between human and other-than-human bodies. Entanglements was a word that just kept on, feels like it's coming up. It's literally entangling all of our research, I think. But yes, again, so by adopting a trans-corporeal approach to research methodology, then we consider the ways in which we are creating bodies of work, and everything that we create are creatures in themselves, enriched. It can be quite an enriching consideration that we are transforming them and reciprocally being transformed by them all the time. And as you can imagine, as an ontological, here we go. This is Stacey Alamo themselves saying that all creatures as embodied beings are intermeshed with the dynamic material world, which crosses through them, transforms them, and is transformed by them. So as you can imagine, yes, the growing ontological framework of transcorporeality is deeply inter and multi and transdisciplinary, rapidly traversing perceived boundaries between varying research areas and practices, and it has seemingly limitless applications, and there's so much yet to be considered and explored, which is, I just find it very tantalizing and like very true to the essence of what transcorporeality and queerness represents. Yes, so transcorporeal research practice resists conventional modes of the academic process, dissolving rigid boundaries between artistic and critical forms, between subjects, queering ideologies and restrictive Western hegemonies around what constitutes valid knowledge. Again, that's kind of harking back to the opening talk there. As in, traditionally that's been limited to that which can only be scientifically verified or capable of logical or mathematical proof. And I just think it's quite an important thing to keep to heart that, like, within the context of the existence of humanity, this kind of particular perspective of knowledge, like an anthropocentric, scientifically positivistic, individualistic, colonial, patriarchal, ageist, and ableist one, is relatively contemporary, and it does an injustice to like excluding time-honored multicultural ways of understanding and communicating intelligence. So the way that this is then kind of translating to my current research project of Sabat verse is partly through the inclusion of arts-based research practice in combination with the more critical text-based components. Queer theory and transcorporeality have hugely influenced the methodology of the project, emphasising the importance of a transdisciplinary and especially a collaborative approach to undertaking research. So as I mentioned, I've got the critical essays, there's the written poetry, there's also this artwork that's been contributed by a beautiful artist, Abby Lynch, in response to the project. Me and my mother are co-creating a tapestry, and also there's a series of film poems that are in production. This is some stills from one of them, just of the raw footage. This is my dad, he used to be a miner, and it's about Yule the Digger, the winter solstice. But yeah, so Elaine Mo's book, Bodily Natures, grapples with the ways in which conceptions of the human self are profoundly altered by the recognition that the environment isn't something out there, but is actually like very much the substance of ourselves. So I'm kind of slightly alluding to this here with the Sabat somas, like a series of bodily movements that encapsulate the Sabats. And hopefully this is kind of like subtly suggesting the kind of blending into the landscape there. But this quote, I feel like it's important to acknowledge that it applies to bodies of work too, that like our research and what we create are both the substance of ourselves and the environment itself. And it's interconnected, it's breathing in a constant flux. It's inevitably incomplete, as any PhD student knows, and yet it's always in a state of becoming. I just wanted to end with another short poetry reading of one of the poems from the PhD. It's due to be published in an anthology later this year. And it's inspired by the Selkies, which are from Celtic folklore, about a type of fae people who can take on the form of, they're seals, but they can shed their seal skins to take on human form as they wish. And I just was so enchanted by this story when I first heard it, and I feel like it is quite queer and transcorporeal in the way that it traverses boundaries between species, and symbolises the fluid and transformative nature of identity. Selkies represent freedom and a connection between the human and the more than human, so it felt appropriate to share it at this conference today. It's a very old story, so there's lots of variations, but the one that I heard goes that there was a young fisherman who sees a group of Selkies by the sea and is like transfixed by them and decides to steal the skin of one. She follows him wailing for a skin back, and he makes a deal with her. I'll give you the skin back if you marry me and have my child. And she agrees, but he doesn't live up to his side of the bargain. And years go by, and the youngest child grows and finds the seal skin in a chest in the attic, and returns it to their mother, who returns to the ocean. And the story ends with the fisherman in his boat catching sight of a group of seals swimming into the deep. Right, so there's some Scottish Gaelic interwoven through it, so I'll just translate those moments as we go. Here's Selkie, find your skin. Away from the tang, busy, grips lost to the spinning. Uera down, watch, a niche, now, as softness is stolen beside rock in wet glimmer. Falachta, hidden, female cow, never lost. A bargain struck this way sounds like the cracking of bird wing bone. Kumis and Talanhu, earth will hold you like a low tectonic rumble, unfelt until rupture. Ushka Ufan, water yourself with yours, with his. How long has it been since you were really held? Cluing again, earth will hold you. Noun dissolved into verb, all is alive and kicking. Talith goose youth, return to flow. Selkie, find your skin, love. Anish, now. The kids are all right. They know Ushka, water. Okay, that's me, and I could waffle about this stuff forever, but if you have, if you want to talk more about any aspect of it, if you've got any feedback, then please do come talk to me, or if you want to reach me on Instagram on Sabatverse, that would be fantastic. Yeah, but thank you so much for being here. Of course.
Thank you so much, Jessica, for this lovely, fascinating, and dreamy presentation. I loved it. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, our next speaker is Sara Massafra, who's a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, funded through a Swiss National Science Foundation Postdoc Mobility Fellowship. Additionally, she is affiliated with the Università della Svizzera Italiana's Istituto di Studi Italiani, where she obtained her PhD in Italian literature and language with a thesis on Andrea Zanotto in 2023. And her paper today is titled Semiotic Explorations in Nature Writing, Unveiling the Intrinsic Connections with the Natural World. Sara, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the organization. My presentation explores how nature's inherent structures and meanings shape human understanding, influencing nature writing. It also focuses on various meaning processes that humans use to connect with nature, and it suggests or try to suggest to develop a methodology to analyze nonverbal modeling strategies in ecological essays, aiming to uncover direct nature experiences within written texts. If we consider the range of possible interpretations of nature writing, it is influenced not only by the written text, but also by the structures of nature itself, which have their own memory, dynamics, and course of change. When the nature outside the written text changes, its meanings can no longer be conveyed to the reader in the same way they were understood by the authors and their contemporaries. In the case of literary works and eco-critical texts, it is generally accepted that translation is more complex when there is a significant difference between the source culture and the target culture. Translating nature essays introduce an additional layer of difficulty. These cases show that interpreting nature essays involve not only the written text, but also the natural world with its species and landscapes. If such connections with structures originating outside human culture are essential to nature writing, then eco-critical analysis should also consider the natural environment itself and the experiences of the author and readers that connect the environment with the text. The focus of eco-criticism cannot be confined to the physical book alone. To find theoretical grounds for such an extension, I consider the semiotic theories, particularly the emerging field of eco-semiotics, drawing on the works of the Tartu Moscow School of Cultural Semiotics, especially considering the analysis conducted by the scholars as Timo Maran, Kalevi Kul, and Almo Farina. The relationship between nature writing and the natural environment is a core focus of eco-criticism, and it has been explored from different approaches. The American writer William Howard, for instance, suggests an ecological interactional perspective as a way for eco-criticism to describe the connections between nature and culture. Glenn Love, the US literary author and critic, highlights the evolutionary relations between the environment and human activity, viewing the physical world as an interpretative context for literature and literary research. The scholar in environmental studies, Greg Garrard, underscores the dual nature of eco-critical studies, emphasizing the need to recognize both the cultural construction of nature and the undeniable reality of nature itself. For eco-criticism, it is crucial to affirm the existence and importance of nature as an external reality, both for the paradigm's identity and for ethical reasons. Semiotic theories, particularly those that consider semiotic processes in nature, may provide a more robust theoretical foundation. One possible direction to start is to focus on the concept of text despite its primary association with cultural semiotics and theory. In the realm of cultural semiotic, the concept of text is central and extends beyond a simple written sequence of words. It signifies a fundamental unit of culture that conveys meaning and function as a whole. A text represents the intersection of internal structures and external codes within a culture, possessing its own memory and semiotic potential. Thus, the property of being a text is not immanent, but is determined by cultural practices. What constitutes a text in a specific culture or context may not be recognized as such in another. In this framework, a text identity is defined by its function within the cultural semiotic system. The British education theorist and semiotician Andrew Stables has proposed the idea of the environment as text, suggesting that the modern literary theory's concept of the author allow for the inclusion of natural phenomena within the definition of text. Stables observed that in landscapes, the network of shared meanings extend beyond the human sphere, making it challenging to distinguish between the creative activities of humans, other life forms, and natural forces. This leads to the question of how and to what extent the environment functions as a text, which varies according to specific cultural and social traditions. For instance, in contexts such as rural landscapes where humans and various living and non-living forces interact, or in forests shaped by the activities and interrelation of numerous organisms, the authorship of text-like structures in nature becomes more tangible. An example of these are animal tracks, which can be seen as non-human writing and whose textual qualities are relatively straightforward to recognize. It could be argued that the similarities between objects of nature and text are merely metaphorical and lack real structural foundation. This argument gains traction when we examine the syntactic components or linguistic structures of written language and seek parallels in the natural environment, or when we compare human languages to animal communication systems. However, from the semiotic perspective discussed here, both human writing and nature structures function as text. They are perceived, interpreted, and valued in similar ways. In cultures such as Estonian, Norwegian, or American, where nature writing and other forms of nature representation are well developed, nature inevitably becomes part of the textual communication within the culture. A semiotically oriented eco-critical study should not limit its analysis to the intrinsic elements of nature essay alone. Instead, it should consider another text formed by the structures of nature and incorporate the experiences and interactions of both writers and reader with this text. Timo Moran identifies several entities involved in nature writing, each possessing its own semiotic activity and memory. A perceivable nature environment, the author of the nature writing, the written nature essay, and the reader of this essay. So to obtain a more dynamic understanding, it is interesting to explore interpretation strategies that facilitate connection with nature. This approach is feasible within a semiotic framework that does not limit meaning-making processes to human culture, but instead views them as capable of connecting structures of very different natures and origins. These perspectives align with Charles Peirce's concept of semiosis, defined as a sign process where something, the sign, stands to somebody for something else, object, in some respect or capacity, the interpretant. According to Peirce, so the object can be anything that a sign represents, ranging from abstract ideas to perceptible objects in the physical world. The different meanings inherent in and attribute to nature are a key focus of ecosemiotics, a branch of semiotic that emerged in the 90s. Ecosemiotics examines the semiotic relationships between organisms and their natural environments. This field can be framed using the three fundamental dimensions of semiotic. It involves analyzing nature structures as it appears and how it is classified, understanding what nature signifies for people and its components, and exploring the personal or social relationships to nature, including participation in it. So ecosemiotics differentiated our relationship with nature by investigating the types of meaning-making processes involved in experiencing nature, the meanings generated from these processes, and how these meanings can be categorized. By recognizing semiotic processes outside of human culture, ecosemiotic also highlights the animal aspects of our interpretative processes. The Estonian biologist and biosemiotic Kalevi Kuhl has developed a general ecosemiotic typology to analyze the different layers of meaning in nature. Building on the Umwelt theory of Baltic German biologist Jakob von Uexküll, Kuhl identifies 4 types of nature based on their accessibility and level of disturbance. The zero nature refers to the nature itself, so the absolute wilderness. The first nature is the nature we perceive, identify, describe, and the second nature is the nature that we have materially altered and transformed. And finally, the third nature is the virtual nature that exists in art and science, for example. So this typology covers both physical and representational processes along the culture-nature spectrum, allowing for an analysis of the various relationships between culture and nature. The role of nature writing within this framework is complex. On one hand, it can be seen as a process of transforming lower types of nature into higher ones through human activity. On the other hand, nature writing is also a representational phenomenon encompassing and reflecting different types of nature, along with their interrelations and transformations. An important realization within the ecosemiotic approach is that nature, as an object of human interpretation, is not a passive or indifferent entity devoid of semiotic activity. Instead, the nature is the result of countless interpretative practices, continuously transformed and filled with various signs, meanings, and signals created by and for other living beings. Jakob von Uexküll described nature as a composition of various interrelated subjective words or environments, using the German term Umwelt to denote these species-specific spheres, which are constructed by the subjects and governed by their own meaning. To conclude, from a semiotic perspective, nature writing is a dual structure, part of its meaning is conveyed through the written text, while others remain embedded in the natural environment. Writing and reading such texts become relational processes, as not every detail about the climate, landforms, and organisms needs to be explicitly written. Many meanings of nature writing are derived from nature itself. This characteristic becomes evident when the connection between a nature essay and its corresponding natural environment is disrupted, either due to environmental changes or cultural translation. In such cases, nature writing may become a closed text, which, with some of its meaning becoming inaccessible. Nature writing occupies so an ambivalent position when compared to direct nature experiences. On one hand, it represents nature experiences filtered through culture and recorded using conventional language. And on the other hand, nature writing is a representational phenomenon that encompasses various types of meaning. So it can contain traces of simple sign relations and interpretative practices that often become obscured by layers of symbolic and conventional meanings in more culturally refined text. As noted in Maran's work, developing a methodology to analyze and study these nonverbal modeling strategies in nature essay could be a promising direction for an ecosemiotic approach to nature writing. This approach would help uncover the underlying nonverbal interpretative practices that are embedded within the text, offering deeper insights into the semiotic process at play. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sara. Very, very interesting presentation. And now we move on to the third speaker, with Natalia, Mirón-Florido. Hi, Natalia. Are you happy to share your slides, or do you want us to share them?
Sure, I can share.
Oh,
Give me
great.
seconds.
So I'll introduce you while you share your slides. Natalia has a bachelor's degree in English study with a pathway in literature in English and a master's degree in comparative literature and literary studies from the University of the Basque Country. She's currently a PhD student in the program of comparative literature and literary studies. Their research interests cover post-coloniality, West-East cultural interactions, gender and queerness, with a preference for fantasy context. And he's gonna talk about Avatar in a paper called Rhizomaic Pandora, Posthumanism, Disability and Speciesism in James Cameron's Avatar. Over to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You show just one window, so okay, can you see it now?
Yep.
Okay, that's perfect. Okay, I don't know why it always starts. Okay, so thank you for your presentation. Thank you to Edgehill University for organizing this symposium. And without further ado, let's move on. So I think that we are going to start with a question that is rather relevant in a symposium that is called Narrating the Nonhuman, and that is, what is human? Well, there have been and continue to be lots of answers to these questions. For instance, in ancient Greece, we had the example of Plato defining the man as an animal, biped and featherless, and Diogenes' response with a plackful exclaiming, "Here's Plato's man." So this just goes on to show that humanism, a discipline that is concerned with the nature of humanity, has multiple branches, in fact, endless branches, but there are some generalizations that we could make. For instance, there is an imperial nature to humanism, and that is why this definition of what is human is often concerned with issues of class, sex, race, etc. So Davies also explains that the conception of the human in uppercase seems to be less and less relevant these days, especially when we realize that these humanisms have become were in the past background ideologies for many of the most oppressive systems and events in history. Because of that, according to because you see, according to some humanisms, or most of them, human is a man, is heterosexual, cisgender, white, abled, neurotypical, upper class, and a human animal. At the same time, this implies that what is not human for humanism are women or non-binary people, queer, transgender, non-white, disabled, neurodivergent, working class, or non-human animals. So in an age where this hierarchization of humanity, of being less or more human, is no longer acceptable, we have other alternatives like those proposed by posthumanism. So posthumanism deals with humanism in two ways. First is it stops considering humanity in a vacuum, and instead integrates them into the technological and cultural systems that interact and develop with them. And second, it fills in these gaps that we have pointed out that appear because of the restrictive nature of humanity according to humanism, by considering the human as no longer the center, as one of my fellow panelists already pointed out. So for today's presentation, we're going to focus on two post-human writers. These are Deleuze and Guattari. He wrote a very obscure book called 1,000 Plateaus. And we are more concretely going to focus on the philosophical concept of the rhizome. So what is a rhizome? So ginger is a rhizome. Biologically, the rhizome is a kind of root whose capacity to regenerate and grow parting from any point inspired Deleuze and Guattari to argue that all organisms are essentially rhizomes. For these authors, a rhizome has 6 principles. So principles 1 and 2 are the principles of connection and heterogeneity. This just means that the organism can establish connections with new elements at any point of the physical body. And by doing so, they are integrating these new parts into the organism. So for instance, I take these glasses and I can put them in my face, or I can put them in my head, and now they are a diadem. And once they are attached, these glasses become part of the organism. That is me. I am not just me. I am me with glasses. Then principle 3 is multiplicity. This principle argues that the organism is both unitary and multiple. That is to say, the rhizome me with glasses is a unitary organism, but is also formed by other individual organisms, me and the glasses. Principle 4 is called a signifying rupture, and this just goes on to say that because the rhizome has no definite center, it can, like ginger, start anew from any point. This makes the rhizome essentially an eternal organism. And theoretically, this implies that if me with glasses lost, for instance, the glasses, I would still continue. But if I was lost in the me with glasses, if I became detached, the organism would just go on with just the glasses. Okay, and then we have the last 2 principles, the principles of cartography and the calcomania. And this means that the rhizome doesn't follow any script to form itself, to develop. On the contrary, it adapts depending on the circumstances. Now, I am me with glasses because I am looking at the computer, but later when I'm outside, I'll just be me without glasses, right? Because I will take them off. And I may look at the computer tomorrow and not be me with glasses. Maybe I choose not to put my glasses on. Me, as a rhizome, is unpredictable. So once we have done this heavy theoretical stuff, I think we can move on to see how it can help us understand these popular culture elements, such as that of James Cameron's Avatar. So Avatar is set in a planet called Pandora, which I would argue is essentially a rhizome. It follows principles 1 and 2 because the planet forms bonds and connections at different points and with different entities. Pandora is not just the planet, it is also the forest, it is the goddess Ewa, it is the Navi, it is the Ikran, and even Grace, a human who we can see here describing Pandora as a global network, basically a rhizome. Then we have the principle of multiplicity. And Pandora also fulfills it because Grace, the Tree of Souls, Home Tree, the Navis, Ewa, each of them have their own unitary entity, but together they form this multifaceted organism that is called Pandora, an organism that has a collective awareness, like Grace explains once again, and an intelligence that responds to stimuli as one. It also follows principle 4 because although it forms these different connections, this network has been cut at different points. So we have, for instance, the disappearance of the Tree of Souls, who falls and dies. We have the cut down of Home Tree. We have the death of Grace, who dies while she's connected to the rhizome through Ewa. We have the animals of the system dying, and through it all, Pandora survives. It develops new connections, it expands, and it is not killed by these detachments because Pandora has no center, no beating heart. We can stop to put down the organism. Pandora always finds a way to survive. And this is because Pandora also follows principles 5 and 6. We are told that Ewa, this part of Pandora, is not one with animals and Navi, like she is with, say, the forest. But we do see that the Navi regularly connects with animals through their braids. We also see they bring the Ikran indirectly into the rhizome through this process. And I'd say indirectly because the Ikran are not supposed to connect directly to Ewa because they don't have braids as such. We never see that. Or have we? The narrative implies that this doesn't happen naturally, yet in the final battle we see all the fauna of Pandora acting collectively as one, just because the circumstances asked for it. This integration of the animals into the rhizome was necessary for the survival of the organism that is Pandora. So we have Rhizomaic Pandora, we have the Navis as detachable parts, we have animals forming both direct and indirect bonds with the rhizome. We have Grace, who is biologically not supposed to be capable of integrating in the rhizome because she doesn't have the means, and still she does it. We have Jake, who has bonds with the Navis, the animals, and even Pandora itself. But of course, this is not really Jake. Jake is a man in a wheelchair, and this is just his avatar. There are times when the only connection existing is between the animal, the human Jake, and his avatar, without Pandora itself. In the same way, sometimes we have Navi only connected to animals and not to Pandora, or to other Navis, which leads me to believe that there are more rhizomes in the equation. So first, we would have the rhizome of the Navi plus the Ikran, which happens when the Navis bond with their animals. Then we have the second rhizome of the human Jake plus the avatar Jake. And then we have the last rhizome. We have humans bonding with these mechaseeds and fusing with them. All of these fulfill principles 1 and 2. They are capable of integrating other organisms into themselves through connection. The Navi are shown to suffer physical pain when the Ikran is hurt, showing that they are indeed part of the same organism and that they respond equally to the stimulus. We have that they also fulfill principle 3 because they are polyphacetic organisms that are formed of other individual unitary organisms. Principle 4 is a bit of a problematic because these characters are capable to die, and with them the rhizome dies too. But we are going to go back to this in a second. And then we have principles 5 and 6. We have these rhizomes changing and adapting to their surroundings in order to fit into different contexts. But let's go back to principle 4, that assumes that the rhizome is eternal. So the problem here seems to be that these three rhizomes do actually have a center, and with the extension of that center, the rhizome is done. Once the Navi, the human, Jake, or Quaritch die, there's no adapting or reforming from that, right? There have been some interesting reasoning behind that. Jung argues that the problematic item in this union is the individuality, the reluctance to completely be dependent on the rhizome, on the organism. An individual, he says, is a parasite for the rhizome, a part that occasionally needs to be purged. All these central characters remain individuals. They refuse to unite with our hierarchies, with the dependent organisms, which is why they are the center. In other words, in these rhizomes, there are parts that are more important than others. And in itself, that is problematic for the formation of a rhizomaic organism. Thus, this is not really an anti-speciesist ecological narrative that considers all living beings at the same level. It is a narrative about nature turning on itself, of a network, a rhizome that needs to purge a part of itself because it is compromising the integrity of the whole organism. The humans are attacked by Pandora not because Jake, someone who is occasionally part of the rhizome, asks for help. They are attacked because they are hurting the rhizomaic organism that is Pandora. That is how the rhizome survives, by having everyone be expendable. But as we have said, these smaller rhizomes don't join with the other organisms on equal terms. On the contrary, they are used as inferior tools, as prosthetics, which has in itself its own implications. For the Navi-Ikran rhizome, the equation of the animals with tools ends up in an act of speciesism because it classifies living creatures according to its species. In the case of the Jake avatar rhizome, the narrative implication is that this form of the rhizome is physically superior to just Jake, has ableist in the implications. And what is the meaning of the Quaritch technology rhizome? Well, I think the objective is to show the viewer the kinds of posthumanism that may be more familiar to them. The cyborg one, the human plus machine. And through these parallelisms in the final battle, when the humans use machines, Jake uses his avatar body and the Navis use the animals, which they can bond with as weapons, explains ultimately that all these individuals are achieving a sort of posthuman nature. So what is the meaning of this and why does it matter? Well, it matters because it changes the meaning of the movie. At first sight, this is an ecological and anti-speciesist movie, but these defective rhizomes help us picture the contrary. The Navi are speciesist. They use animals as expendable weapons, and though they have emotional bonds with them, they obviously see themselves as superior. Jake has an internalized ableism and a bit of a white savior complex. He uses his avatar body to lead the people he had set out to colonize into battle, while leaving his human disabled body in the forest trap. That's implying that it is only through the avatar that he can gain agency and establishing a link between disability and inability. And humans are the worst of all. They are unrepentant and sometimes straight away evil. They create machines that destroy nature, and though they are expelled, we see them return in the second movie and commit even more heinous crimes against nature. In other words, the movie denigrates disabled people and other humans that defy traditional notions of humanism and advocates for the use of technology, nature, and particularly animals as tools to reach a post-human status that ultimately serves human interests. It is, in short, a surprisingly humanist post-human narrative. So this is the end of my presentation. Here you have my references, and if you want to contact me at any point, here you have my socials. So, Iraionitan, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Natalia. Thank you for the fascinating presentation.
Identity, how much do people peoples, animals live on. Yeah. But no, that's fascinating. I'm not sure how much there was a question in there, but as much as I can, I need to put some notes on them.
No, it's just sort of that concept of kind of shedding the skin and how that can, because obviously the story that you told is that by regaining the skin, there was that agency of returning to the sea. So I suppose that's just kind of like, in a way, similar but also sort of separate. So I don't know if that's kind of created any influence.
No, definitely. Thank you. Yeah.
And then I also had a quick question for Natalia, also kind of on that similar strand of the influence, because I know that sort of Avatar is got a lot of colonial and sort of concepts that draw a lot on the kind of way that Native Americans sort of like, I think there's a scene in the film where I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think an animal was killed and they have this thing about making sure that it's like respected as it's dying, which is very much kind of influenced by that. So it's quite interesting, that sort of specious dimension. So I don't know, when you were kind of researching it, if you came across kind of literature that sort of spoke about that kind of concept of how it was influenced and influential in the way it was constructed.
Okay. So the director, James Cameron, he did say that Avatar was basically Pocahontas but in space. So I wonder to which extent he actually did his research, because I always have the feeling that he has great intentions, but he falls short so many times. I did talk about this in a recent conference about these prayers that they do say to the animals. And the thing that bothered me is that they do not say that for all the animals. So, for instance, we see them doing it when, yes, Jake accidentally, provokes the killing of this dog, these dogs. We also see them praying when they are hunting, but only when they are hunting individuals. There's a scene where there's collective hunting of all, like the tribe. There are no prayers there. In the second movie, we see them. In fact, the movie opens with the killing of fish, and there is no prayer there. So I got the feeling that this is something that he based on stereotypes rather than on true research, because one of my points in that presentation and in some others I have done of this universe is that they are very Orientalist movies. They pretend not to be, but they are. And this kind of connects with what I was saying now. There are like two readings to these movies. There is what appears to be and what ends up being. So yeah, I think it resonated a lot with many of us, this feeling of thanking the animal and praying for them. But I'm not so sure it was actually something that was so well thought of.
Thank you. I think that's very true. Yeah.
And yet, yes, Ben, please.
Thanks, folks. It's so interesting. I've got one for Jessie, but you've already had it. I'll say it because I find it interesting, and I'm quite naive in the subject. So it'll be interesting to hear your thoughts on it. In regards to co-opting queerness by like capitalist structures or even effective altruistic structures. So I've just recently listened to an interview between Soy the Cow, the drag artist, who does loads of vegan activism stuff, with a food effective altruist guy who was talking about how we should, to get people onto the vegan diet and to like promote veganism and plant-based eating, we should see it more as non-binary, like blending. So blending animal products with plant-based, so there's less animal products in the product itself. But that really a little light up in my head about narratives around morals and like, well, what's that story we're telling to the consumer that blending is fine because there's only a little bit of an animal in there, and there's a progression there. And this chap coined it under the umbrella of queerness and a non-binary kind of setup. So I found that interesting how they were co-opting that kind of narrative around personal identity and community, but on a kind of a systematic but with good intentions kind of setup.
No, that's really fascinating.
Mm.
That is really fascinating, and I feel like something that kind of is becoming a bit of a joke when I'm talking with people about these kind of things, how much we can return to like, well, it's nuanced. It's nuanced, it's nuanced, it's never black and white, and it feels like, again, you get the dualities, and I hadn't considered that in terms of the vegan diet, the prospect of it being less black and white in terms of it's vegan or it's not. You know, yeah, and it's and again in terms of the nuance, like, and I'm hesitant to use like good and bad because like that's, you know, it's complicated, but I suppose if that does minimize the overall production and consumption of you know, dairy and meat products, then it's for, you know, the best, but then like, yeah, it's complicated, isn't it, that? Yeah, something else I was going to say in response to this. But no, that's fascinating concept, and thank you.
I do have one for
Yeah,
Ian
sure,
as well.
sure.
That was I said I didn't have a question. I gave you a question. So sorry. Yeah, I'm really interested in like the fetishization of like trauma and kind of like this kind of trauma bathing, and then this kind of sense that as humans we create robots that look like us to abuse. That's a really interesting like thing to look at, and how we make them into animals to abuse as well. This kind of narrative that we tell ourselves, but then also this kind of this Frankenstein monster, how we create in a way this kind of blank slate of a human, and then this monster, it sees the horrors of the human. I don't know if you've looked into, obviously I'm just prying in here, but there's this whole idea of looking like a human to abuse the human. It's like a self-hatred Freudian kind of thing going on.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think like touched on what you just said. Like I've found that like almost narratives of it, because obviously it is still speculative, so we're largely talking about like narratives, but on like a diegetic level, it's almost like robots who are imagined like sort of familial Western notions of pets, so dogs, cats, they are like sort of treated holistically and sort of, I guess, less from almost an exploitative perspective, because they're already framed as pets. Like that framing is already pre-existing from like an anthropocentric perspective. And then I guess that kind of gets interesting when you think about, well, the abusion of robots who either look like less familial animals or humans or nothing entirely representing that. How does that change where we're going from? But I mean, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the film is it's not great. Like, it's not a necessarily good film, but I mean, part of my thing is reading kind of like philosophical radicality into these mainstream texts. But it was kind of like it can be quite a hard watch, especially it came out at the end of last year, and there's a lot of big explosion sequences and people being blown up, and it's in the context of what's going on in the world, it's really hard to watch. So there's that in the sense of like, we might think it's one step removed in terms of like it just being sort of a figure of a robot, but the context in which we watch it really shapes the importance of it, I think. But yeah, that's a really good question. Thank you.
Last question, very quick.
No,
Sorry.
you go then, because I've already asked. So you go, Hannah.
No, sorry. Question.
I was just squeezing very. I mean, I think I could have applied to multiple ones, but just for sake of time, and I'll ask it to Natalia, which is kind of about, obviously you talked about speciesism and ableism, and I wondered whether you'd also kind of considered like gender as part of that in your thing as well, because obviously that's something certainly struck me when I watched the Avatar film. It's like this kind of idea of like the kind of the male figure that Jake embodies, and kind of the influence of that sort of gendered narrative as well.
Yeah, I think gender is very interesting because again, there are like, at first sight, there's this impression that they break with gender stereotypes, that it's like very modern, I want to say, but because Neytiri hunts, we have female hunters, we have male hunters. The issue I find is that we don't actually have that much insight into how the society works. B, this kind of idea that they are all equal is very easily challenged. For instance, I was watching the second movie, and there was this moment where Neytiri was having a conversation with Ronald, who's like the spiritual leader of another tribe. And she was telling her, you know, my partner, Jake, he's a great warrior. And Ronald doesn't react well. And Jake goes and apologizes for Neytiri. He says, I apologize for my mates. And she was very angry and said, don't apologize for me. I thought that somehow the movies had become less feminist, and I'm not sure why. I was pretty shocked when I watched that, because I live in Spain, but I watched it in the original language, in English. And we find other things that show that there is not really that much gender equality. We see, for instance, Neytiri giving away everything for him, but for Jake, doesn't really give much. It is implied that he gives he renounces his human companionship, but he really doesn't, because he doesn't have a family on Earth. He doesn't actually like many of the people that he talks to. And again, going back to the second movie, like his role is so much, it's so patriarchal for a society that is supposed to be transmitted matrilineally. So for instance, when you have a child, the surname of that child is not who is his or the father, is who's their mother. So I see these contradictions, and I feel like they are trying, but they are not committing, because they want to cater for everyone, and in the end, it comes out looking like this weird thing that I can't really make sense of. Like I honestly, I would love to be in their heads, because they are. You will excuse me for the expression, but I feel like they are half-assing everything. And the movie has such potential, and they are progressively losing it. I hope that the third movie kind of responds to this a little bit, because we do see that the second movie responds to some criticism that we saw in the first movie, for instance, about the treatment of animals. But yeah, so gender, it continues to be a very patriarchal society despite appearances. And we even have the idea that even though it's an alien society, why do we still have like just woman and man, and we are only shown heterosexual relationships? There are non-binary characters. There are not queer relationships. And I think I'm talking too much, so I will leave it there.
Thank you, Natalia. Thank you to all speakers. We ran a bit late, but it was absolutely worth it. So, and see you directly in the other meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.